The summer day in Houston was particularly hot, and the air inside the Walmart store felt heavy and overheated. In the electronics department, where Jake Hunter worked as a loss prevention manager, the usual hustle and bustle prevailed. Customers browsed televisions, games, and accessories, while employees restocked the shelves with new products. Jake was focused on checking the surveillance cameras when one particular customer caught his attention. A man in a worn-out coat and hat entered the department with a clear purpose. His strange behavior immediately stood out. He kept glancing around. His movements were nervous and clumsy. Jake noticed the customer picking up a prepaid card, which required regular interaction with the cashier for activation. The man headed straight to the counter and began demanding the card be activated. "I need this card activated right now." His voice was tense, and his tone aggressive. He repeated his demands, leaving Jake with no choice but to try and calm the customer down. However, the man seemed unwilling to listen to any explanations. His voice grew louder, and his words more threatening. Jake noticed that the customer's behavior was strange and unpredictable. The man's appearance and aggression raised suspicions. With his terrible skin, gray hair sticking out from under his unkempt hat, he seemed completely out of control. His actions were filled with panic and irritation. He began shouting, spewing threats at Jake and those around him, drawing the attention of other customers and employees. "I said, I need this card now," he barked, stepping closer to Jake, "or you'll all regret it." As soon as Jake felt the situation was spiraling out of control, he saw the customer's hands start to tremble, and his eyes filled with confusion and rage. The man took a step forward, and Jake noticed his actions becoming more aggressive. It became clear that this person posed an immediate threat to everyone in the store. When Jake Hunter, the loss prevention manager at Walmart, realized that the customer was becoming increasingly aggressive, he decided to call security. His calm demeanor was beginning to crack, and he tried to maintain an appearance of confidence to avoid escalating the situation. Jake reluctantly broke away from his conversation with the customer and began dialing the security number on his mobile phone. His hands trembled slightly from the tension, and he hoped that security would arrive before things got out of hand. The man, not receiving an immediate response, started yelling louder, drawing the attention of shoppers and store employees. "Don't you understand what I'm saying?" the customer screamed. His voice was laced with fury, and his eyes gleamed with a mad intensity. "If you don't activate this card right now, I'll tear this place apart." Seeing that security wasn't arriving quickly enough, Jake attempted to calm the customer, but this only made things worse. Feeling ignored, the man grew even more aggressive. He threw a cardboard box containing a television to the floor and began flailing his arms, knocking items off the shelves. His actions caused panic among the customers, who started scrambling around the store, with several people crying out in fear. Jake, feeling his patience wearing thin, tried to position himself between the customer and the checkout counter to prevent further destruction. "Please, calm down, we can resolve this if you just wait a moment." But the customer only glared at him as if he were an enemy, and suddenly became even more aggressive. He made a sudden move toward Jake, causing him to step back. Jake's feet tangled in the fallen boxes, and he nearly lost his balance but managed to stay upright. The man began shouting threats and obscenities and soon lunged at Jake, trying to grab him by the shirt. The situation reached a critical point. Jake felt his heart pounding in his chest as fear and adrenaline surged through him. Security guards, fully geared, stormed into the department in an attempt to restrain the customer. They twisted his arms behind his back and tried to calm him down. But he continued to resist, making terrifying sounds. Jake stood to the side, trying to catch his breath, watching as the security team dealt with the unruly customer. As one of the guards held the man down, another approached Jake to check on him. "Are you all right? We saw everything that happened. We'll take care of the customer now." The street in front of Walmart was already filled with flashing lights and the sounds of police radios. The police and security teams, who had arrived on the scene, quickly got to work. One of the security guards, Bob Martin, met the officers at the entrance and began explaining the situation. "There's chaos inside," Bob said, his face pale from the stress he had just endured. "That customer smashed the displays, yelling, threatening. We managed to restrain him, but he's still going wild." The police, led by Sergeant Matt Rogers, quickly entered the store. Jake, who was still standing by the register, noticed the officers, fully geared, heading toward the electronics department. The security guards were holding down the customer, who was now showing clear signs of a complete psychotic breakdown. His movements were erratic and uncoordinated, and his eyes were wild and vacant. As soon as the police entered the department, the customer immediately started shouting and trying to break free. He hurled boxes in all directions and shattered display cases, causing customers to flee toward the exits in panic. Sergeant Rogers, along with two of his subordinates, quickly surrounded the man. Keeping him at gunpoint. "Step back," the sergeant shouted. "We don't want anyone to get hurt. Stop what you're doing and calm down." Ignoring the warnings, the customer continued his rampage. The officers cautiously but decisively approached him, and one of them managed to handcuff his hands behind his back. It wasn't easy, as the man continued to resist, screaming wildly and jerking around. Once the customer was finally subdued and placed in handcuffs, he was searched. One of the officers, John Blake, pulled a small plastic bag out of the man's pocket containing a substance they found on him. "This is a new synthetic drug," John said, showing the bag to the others. "This is likely the cause of his aggressive behavior. Substances like this have recently started appearing in this area." Sergeant Rogers nodded, realizing they had a serious case on their hands. "We need to send this in for analysis. If this drug is indeed new, it could be the reason for the recent incidents. We need to find out how it got here and who's distributing it." As the customer was placed in the police car, Jake watched the scene unfold. He was nervous but felt a sense of relief that the situation was under control. The police began collecting evidence and inspecting the damage in the store. The remaining customers were questioned, and the police tried to piece together a full picture of the incident. Jake spoke with Sergeant Rogers, providing his testimony and recounting what had happened. "Thank you for your help, Jake," Rogers said. "We'll keep you informed. We're going to find out who's behind this drug and how it ended up in this man's hands. We'll also review the security footage to see if there was any other suspicious activity." As the investigators began their work, Jake returned to his duties, but the thoughts of what had happened lingered in his mind. He knew this case might only be the beginning of a bigger problem. The summer day in Houston was hot and oppressive, but Jake Hunter barely noticed, as his thoughts were consumed by the recent incident at Walmart. After the police had taken away the aggressive customer, Jake continued to work in a daze, but his mind was fixated on what had happened. When he finally returned home and turned on the television, he came across a news segment that immediately caught his attention. The news anchor, Catherine Lee, spoke directly into the camera, her expression serious. A synthetic drug laboratory was recently discovered in Houston. This facility was found in an industrial area south of the city. Preliminary reports suggest that the laboratory is connected to the recently discovered drug that caused the aggressive behavior in a Walmart customer. The screen flashed images of police officers working at the scene, with boxes filled with chemicals in the background. Jake watched intently. He realized that the lab was located not far from the area where he had noticed unusual activity a few weeks ago. As the anchor continued discussing the discovered lab and its potential links to the drugs, Jake felt a new understanding of the situation begin to form. He remembered that on the day he had noticed those unusual activities, his attention had been drawn to the numerous movements of people and trucks that seemed out of place for that area. The next morning, Jake decided to conduct his own investigation. He drove to the industrial zone where the lab was located, determined to see the place for himself. As he approached the lab, he noticed police tape and numerous vehicles. The area was cordoned off, and access was restricted. As Jake stood at a distance, observing, he saw several police officers carrying boxes and bags out of the lab. One of the officers recognized him from the day before. "Hey, Jake, what are you doing here?" the officer asked, a bit surprised to see him. "Hi, Steve, I'm just trying to piece this together. You see, that incident at Walmart is somehow linked to this lab. Maybe I can help or find something useful," Jake replied, pointing toward the lab. Steve nodded. "Yeah, that's possible. We're still trying to figure out how they're connected to the drug distribution. Right now, we're tracing all the leads and trying to see who was behind this." Seeing that the police efforts were focused on gathering evidence, Jake decided to head back to his office and start researching additional materials. He checked the archives and noticed that there had indeed been reports of unusual activities in the lab's vicinity, such as frequent cargo deliveries and movements of unknown individuals. These matched his own observations. Jake Hunter sat at his desk in the Walmart office, reviewing reports and photographs from the crime scene when one detail mentioned in recent news caught his attention. In the materials concerning the discovered laboratory, he found references to several local bars and nightclubs that were connected to the sale of illegal substances. One of these clubs particularly piqued his interest: Starry Secret. Starry Secret was a popular bar in Houston, known for its cozy interior and live music. However, Jake knew that this establishment had its dark sides. Rumors about the club often mentioned illegal deals that took place in the secluded corners of the venue. Deciding that this might be the key to solving the mystery, Jake headed to Starry Secret the following evening. He hoped to find more information about the club and its connection to the drug dealers. The entrance to the club was filled with a haze of cigarette smoke and the sounds of jazz, but Jake remained focused on his goal. He ordered a drink from the bartender, carefully choosing a spot where he could observe the happenings around him. Soon, Jake noticed a few people who stood out from the rest of the patrons. These individuals, dressed in expensive suits and adorned with noticeable accessories, were clearly not locals. They behaved suspiciously, whispering to each other and occasionally glancing around nervously. Jake made notes about their behavior and appearance, then decided to approach the table where one of the men, a long-haired individual wearing dark sunglasses, was seated. Pretending to look for the restroom, Jake walked past the table, intentionally dropping his glass, and in doing so, managed to get close enough to overhear fragments of their conversation. "Everything is ready for the next shipment," one of the men said. "The local buyers are already waiting. Make sure the delivery goes smoothly." These words confirmed Jake's suspicions. He had already heard that the drugs from the laboratory might have been used for real-world testing, and now it seemed that Starry Secret was part of this operation. After the conversation became less informative, Jake decided to take a break. He ordered another drink and carefully observed the actions of the suspicious visitors. Soon, his attention was drawn to a man who left the club and headed toward the parked cars. Jake followed him at a safe distance. The man got into one of the cars, which looked expensive and brand new. Jake noticed that the trunk held boxes with a logo that reminded him of the packaging he had seen at the laboratory's warehouse. This was enough for Jake to draw conclusions and make notes. As he headed home, Jake felt confident that he was on the right track. Starry Secret and its suspicious visitors could be linked to key elements in the drug trafficking chain. He knew that the next steps would involve establishing contacts and gathering more information about those who ran the club. Several days had passed since Jake Hunter visited Starry Secret and discovered the club's connection to drug traffickers. New incidents had occurred in Houston, each resembling the case with the customer at Walmart. The first alarm came from a pharmacy on the other side of town. A customer, clearly under the influence of drugs, began behaving aggressively, smashing displays and threatening the staff. His behavior, marked by unnatural excitement and paranoia, reminded Jake of what he had already witnessed. These incidents were not isolated. Over the following week, the police and medical facilities recorded several similar cases, all with the same symptoms: uncontrollable aggression, paranoia, and destructive behavior. Jake found that each of these cases was linked to customers who might be part of the same drug network. The distribution of the drug seemed to be spreading rapidly throughout the city. Jake began receiving reports from medical workers and law enforcement officers, alerting him to new cases. One report mentioned the appearance of user groups in one part of the city, where people were under the influence of the same drug. These groups were becoming increasingly aggressive and posed a threat to public safety. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Jake decided to contact the narcotics detective leading the investigation into the drug network. The detective was Alex Rains. They met at a cafe to discuss the situation. "Jake, good to see you," Alex began, his eyes gleaming with interest. "The cases you're describing match what we have. We think the drug you're talking about has been spread to several areas of the city. I've received information that new supplies have appeared in nightclubs and bars." "I was at Starry Secret," Jake said. "I saw that drugs might be passing through that club. I think the club could be a central link in the supply chain." Alex nodded. "We've already been monitoring several such clubs and bars. But you know what? We have new information. Recently, one of our sources reported a plan to distribute this drug on a large scale, potentially creating a major crisis." Jake was stunned. "A major crisis? Why?" There are a few theories, Alex replied. They might be trying to create chaos in the city to divert attention from more serious operations. Or they could be trying to increase their influence and expand their network. We need to take immediate action. Jake and Alex discussed the details, and Jake provided the information he had gathered, including details about the club and the suspicious individuals. The detective agreed that Jake's information was invaluable and could help in developing strategies to prevent further drug distribution. In the following days, Jake and the police focused on monitoring and preventing new incidents. They increased surveillance of the clubs and bars in question. Jake also began working more closely with local medical facilities to track and document all cases of aggressive behavior. The information that Jake and Alex gathered helped create a clearer picture of how the drugs were distributed across neighborhoods and identified several key points in the drug trafficking network. These new findings allowed them to better understand the scope of the problem and devise a plan of action. As Jake continued to monitor developments and work with the police, the city of Houston found itself in a state of alert. People began discussing the strange incidents and the rising number of drug-related crimes. Summer was slowly turning into autumn, and Jake Hunter continued to monitor the unfolding events. While the investigation into the drug trafficking and its impact on the area was yielding results, a new suspicion arose in his mind. Jake's attention was drawn to one of the Walmart employees who had been unusually active lately. The employee in question was Kevin Davis, who worked in the inventory department. Jake noticed that Kevin often stayed late at work, long after other employees had left. Kevin was quiet and introverted, but his constant presence in the store after hours raised Jake's suspicions. What particularly troubled him was that Kevin had access to the customer database and their purchase history, information that could be valuable to drug traffickers. To find out what was behind his suspicions, Jake decided to conduct his own investigation. He started by reviewing the store's surveillance footage, where Kevin frequently appeared. After carefully studying these recordings, Jake noticed that Kevin had a habit of leaving the store with a large bag, which he often stashed in the trunk of his car. One evening, while reviewing the surveillance footage, Jake saw Kevin leaving the store with the bag once again. This time, Jake decided to follow him, relying on his caution and keeping a safe distance. Kevin drove to a secluded area of the city where, according to locals, warehouses and small businesses were located. Jake watched as Kevin entered the grounds of a small warehouse that wasn't marked on any maps and was described by residents as abandoned. He waited until Kevin went inside, and when he was out of sight, Jake decided to check out the place. Cautiously, Jake made his way onto the warehouse grounds. His senses heightened as the foul smell and strange noises from inside added to his anxiety. Inside, he found several cardboard boxes containing packages of drugs and related items, such as empty vials. Jake took several photos and gathered evidence that could confirm his suspicions. He also noticed that a few people were working in the warehouse, likely connected to the drug operation. Now he had undeniable proof linking Kevin to criminal activities. The next morning, Jake collected all his evidence and contacted Detective Alex Rains. They met at the police station, where Jake showed the photos and shared his observations. Alex was impressed. "This is serious evidence, Jake. We need to act quickly to prevent further crimes. I'll start preparing a search warrant for the warehouse and interrogate Kevin." Jake felt a sense of relief. He knew this step was crucial for advancing the investigation and unraveling the entire complex network of drug traffickers. That same day, the police raided the warehouse, finding drugs and several related documents. Kevin Davis was arrested, and his interrogation confirmed that he was connected to the drug network and had used his position at Walmart to gather information on potential customers. The investigation gained new momentum. With Kevin exposed as a key link in the drug network, Jake and the police could continue their fight against the crime that had proven to be even deeper than they had imagined. When Jake Hunter and Detective Alex Rains returned from the warehouse raid, their goal was clear: to uncover how the drugs found on the client were connected to secret testing and street distribution. The signs that the lab was just part of a more complex scheme became increasingly apparent. That evening, Jake and Alex began by analyzing the evidence found at the warehouse. Every detail, from the drug packaging to the vials and records, could provide a key to solving the mystery. They decided to interrogate the main figures who had been apprehended during the raid and investigate their connections. Meanwhile, Jake continued to review the surveillance footage and documents gathered from the warehouse. He came across something intriguing. One of the boxes contained packs of fake prepaid cards that appeared to be used to pay for drugs. These cards were registered under different names, indicating active drug testing on various clients. One morning, Jake and Alex held a meeting with the investigative team. They discussed their latest findings and made some crucial conclusions. The records revealed that the drugs produced in the lab were not only being distributed but were also being tested on real people. We've discovered that the drug network used retail outlets to test drugs on people before selling them on the streets. Alex explained. This practice allows them to assess how quickly the drugs cause addiction and what side effects may occur. The problem is, they could have been using people without their knowledge. Jake sensed that this aspect of the investigation was becoming central. The lab might be connected to a larger network conducting drug tests on consumers, using stores like Walmart for their experiments. They decided to conduct a second inspection of the warehouse, paying closer attention to overlooked details. This time, Jake found evidence that had previously been missed, several notes and memos containing annotations about drug testing, as well as logs recording the dates and results of the tests. These records seemed to track people's reactions to the drugs, including not just physical but also mental changes. A significant discovery occurred when Jake found client lists that included names and contact information of people to whom the drugs were delivered for testing. These lists contained addresses and phone numbers, allowing them to link the testing to specific incidents in the stores. It looks like they were monitoring every stage of the testing, Alex observed as he reviewed the records. This could help us identify who else was involved in this network. As they continued to work on the case, Jake discovered that some of the addresses on the lists belonged to small shops and cafes in different parts of the city, which had previously shown no clear connection to drug trafficking. This revelation directed the investigation into new areas and suggested that the drug distribution network might be even more extensive than they had initially thought. Several days had passed since Jake Hunter and Detective Alex Rains uncovered new evidence at the warehouse. While the investigation was progressing, unsettling changes began to occur in Jake's life. At first, it was small things, strange phone calls that would disconnect as soon as he answered, and notes written in an unreadable scrawl left in his mailbox. One morning, as Jake stepped outside to head to work, he discovered that his car had been doused with a foul-smelling liquid. The stench permeated the entire parking area, and Jake immediately recognized it as an attempt to intimidate him. He also noticed a slight scratch on his windshield and an unfamiliar device, a tampered car alarm, left in his trunk. The fear intensified when Jake realized that his home was being watched. One evening, as he returned home from work, he spotted a strange man sitting in a car on a nearby street, observing his house. Jake tried to memorize the license plate, but by the time he returned with a camera, the car was gone. The surveillance became undeniable. Throughout the week, Jake noticed suspicious cars near his house several times. Each time he approached, they would drive away. Soon, he began to be followed on his way to work as well. Once, he spotted a car trailing him for several blocks before disappearing into the fog. One evening, while checking his mail, Jake found a letter with no return address. Inside was a simple card with the image of a grim silhouette and the text, "Finish what you started. And see what happens to those you love." Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this warning was tied to his investigation. Jake immediately contacted Alex and informed him of what was happening. Alarmed, Alex suggested increasing security measures and arranging for Jake to have protection. Together, they discussed possible steps to ensure the safety of Jake and his loved ones. Jake also decided to install surveillance cameras around his home. His colleagues from the investigation helped set up alarm systems and advised him to be vigilant about his routines and routes. Despite the precautions, the threats continued. One day, after finishing a run in the park, Jake found a note on his car with an image of a gun and the words, "Next time will be the last." Unsure of how much more he could endure, Jake reached out to Alex again. They decided to conduct nighttime surveillance and try to catch those attempting to intimidate him. In the meantime, Jake tried to keep his composure and continued working on the case despite the growing difficulties. The criminal network might have been trying to cover its tracks by creating a tense atmosphere around Jake. This made the investigation even more complex and dangerous. One morning, Jake and Alex met at the police station to discuss the latest findings. Projected on the screen before them were the photos and records they had managed to gather. These materials confirmed their suspicions. The lab producing the dangerous drug was only a small part of a much more complex scheme. "Take a look at this," Alex said, pointing to a diagram that outlined various elements of the network. "We've found connections between several high-profile criminal groups. It seems they're using new technologies to distribute the drugs." Jake, engrossed in the details, noticed that the diagram not only showed local groups but also international connections. One of the key elements that caught his attention was a list of several IP addresses linked to online drug trafficking. These addresses pointed to hidden servers used to coordinate shipments and sales. "I was shocked when I saw this," Alex continued. "Some of these groups aren't just selling drugs. They're using sophisticated algorithms and cryptography to protect their operations. They've even implemented blockchain technology to track the movement of money." Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "And that explains why it's been so hard for us to find anything concrete. They've obscured their tracks using cutting-edge technology." The police had already begun decrypting the encrypted messages found on one of the seized servers. These messages contained instructions on how to use various technologies that ensured the safety and anonymity of the criminal activities. Jake and Alex realized that their task had become even more challenging. They now had to not only fight crime but also dismantle complex technical schemes. Tracing the origins proved to be more tangled than they had anticipated. During one of the intelligence operations, Jake received information about secret meetings held in underground clubs and abandoned warehouses, where representatives from various criminal groups gathered. These weren't just drug-selling venues, they used these places to exchange experiences, technologies, and methods. "We need to check out every one of these locations," Jake said. "If we can establish where these meetings are taking place, we can take down the key players in the network." Alex agreed. "But we need to be careful. These groups might be armed and ready for violence. We have to prepare for possible resistance." Jake and Alex organized raids on all the identified locations. With each raid, the police uncovered new evidence, hidden rooms equipped with advanced technology, documents confirming international connections, and even records showing how drugs were being moved around the world. As the investigation progressed, Jake and Alex increasingly realized the scale of the criminal network. The lab they had found earlier was only the visible part of the iceberg. Now, they needed to find a way to stop the high-profile criminal groups and dismantle their carefully concealed network. Jake and the police investigation had reached a critical point. After numerous raids, interviews, and analysis of gathered evidence, it became clear that the drug network linked to the lab had deep roots in Houston's business community. Those running the criminal enterprise evidently had powerful connections in the upper echelons of society. One evening after a particularly grueling day, Jake sat at his desk, surrounded by a mountain of documents. Alex Raines entered the office with 2 cups of coffee and grumbled, "It looks like we've stumbled onto something bigger than just a drug network." Alex laid out several documents and records before Jake, which featured the names of prominent local businessmen. Jake scrutinized the papers. While many names seemed inconsequential at first glance, a few caught his attention. They were associated with major companies that appeared to have no direct connection to drug trafficking. "Look at these records," Alex said. "Each of these names is linked to firms that hold prominent positions in the city. Their businesses range from food distribution to logistics. They all had financial ties to various hidden accounts and, as we've found, to individuals directly connected to the drug network." Jake frowned. "How do they manage to remain unnoticed? These companies seem completely legitimate." Alex nodded. "That's their strength. They use their businesses as a cover. The money flows through legitimate firms before reaching the criminals." While reviewing the documents, Jake noticed several companies that frequently found themselves at the center of business activity but never attracted suspicion. One such company was a food distribution firm named Harris Logistics. Jake knew that this company had extensive connections with various local stores and restaurants. However, what caught his eye were the frequent and substantial money transfers to accounts. "Why these companies?" Jake asked. "How do they infiltrate the business?" Alex shrugged. "They buy influence. The businessmen working for them can exert significant influence over their sectors and the city as a whole. Additionally, they provide services like logistics and transportation, which are used to move the drugs." As they delved into the details, Jake and Alex discovered that many of these firms also played a crucial role in concealing financial flows. They used complex schemes to mask their income sources, allowing them to evade taxes and financial oversight. We need to analyze each of these companies more thoroughly, Jake said. If we can uncover additional evidence, it will give us the opportunity to arrest those behind the entire network. Quote. Soon, the police gained access to internal documents and conducted thorough checks of every business linked to the network. The documents revealed that some businessmen were directly collaborating with drug traffickers, providing them with resources and protecting their operations under the guise of legitimate activities. During a search of the offices of one of the suspect companies, the police found hidden servers containing records of drug movements and financial transactions. Now we know who's behind this operation, Jake said. These people used their companies as a means to cover up their criminal activities. The investigation led to local businessmen using their companies to conceal criminal activities becoming the main suspects. The hidden connections and exposed schemes demonstrated how deeply the drug network had infiltrated the legitimate structures of society. On one hot summer night, Jake Hunter, the loss prevention manager at Walmart, didn't expect his day to take such an unexpected turn. He was reviewing the latest data collected on businessmen linked to the drug network when his phone buzzed. A message from Alex Rains appeared on the screen. Contact made. Head to the Old Times bar immediately. What the hell? Jake muttered to himself, but without wasting time, he grabbed his car keys and headed to the designated location. The Old Times bar was one of those places rarely frequented by ordinary citizens. Located in a shady part of town, it was known for its dubious patrons and tangled stories. As Jake pulled into the parking lot, he saw Alex waiting for him by the bar's entrance. Alex looked tense, his eyes darting around constantly. What's going on? Jake asked as he approached. Informant. He's ready to talk, but we need to be cautious. His name is Rick Davis. He was a small player in the drug network but now wants to cooperate with us to avoid debts and possible punishment, Alex replied. Entering the bar, Jake noticed it looked just as he expected, dirty, with dim lighting and tired patrons who barely paid attention to their surroundings. Alex led Jake to a separate room at the back of the establishment, where a short, disheveled man with a nervous demeanor, Rick Davis, was sitting. Rick was visibly frightened. His hands trembled as he handed Jake and Alex several sheets of paper. Here's what I know, Rick began, his voice barely audible. These guys aren't just drug dealers. They work for a larger organization. The lab is only a part of their business model. The real money flows through a network of shell companies. He pulled out a smartphone and showed Jake several photos. Here are the client lists, addresses, and connections with other groups. This is the plan they've developed for distributing drugs and evading law enforcement. Jake carefully examined the photos and recognized some familiar faces, businessmen already involved in their investigation. So, they're not just into drug trafficking. They're also actively manipulating financial flows using front companies, Jake said, looking at Rick. Rick nodded. Yes, and they're preparing a major shipment that's supposed to come through Houston next week. It will all be stored in one of the warehouses in South Houston. I think they're planning a large-scale operation. Does their plan involve anything else? Jake asked. Rick glanced around and lowered his voice slightly. Yes. They plan to use this warehouse not only to store drugs but also to keep counterfeit documents that will help them launder their money. I've heard they're planning how this will work in the long term. Alex, who had been listening attentively, added, if this is true, we need to act fast. The warehouse needs to be secured before it's too late. Rick reached into his pocket and pulled out another flash drive. This drive contains information about the planned stage of the deal. All the details, including contacts and delivery routes. I hope this helps you stop them. Jake took the flash drive and looked at Rick with gratitude. You made the right choice. We'll do everything we can to stop them. Be careful, they might try to find you. Rick nervously nodded and, after a quick goodbye, left the bar. Alex and Jake remained in the room, carefully studying the information. This flash drive is the key, Alex said. If Rick is right, we need to prepare for a raid on the warehouse and act quickly. Reviewing the data, Jake realized they had a unique opportunity to uncover not only the scale of the drug network but also critical details that would allow them to dismantle it. Now they needed to plan an operational intervention to seize this chance. With these thoughts, Jake and Alex began preparing for the next phase of the investigation, knowing that time was working against them and every minute mattered. The foggy and rainy morning, as Houston was just beginning to wake up, provided the perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. Armed to the teeth, police teams gathered in a remote corner of the city. Jake Hunter and Alex Rains stood next to Detective Nina Gray, the operations commander, as they closely studied a map marking the location of the suspected lab. "Rick Davis provided us with the exact coordinates," Nina said, pointing to the indicated address. "We'll be operating with 2 teams simultaneously. The first team will take the main entrance and check the interior. The second team will cover possible exits and block any escape routes." Jake and Alex exchanged glances. Given all the information from the informant, the operation had to be swift and precise. No unnecessary movements. Just a full seizure and securing the premises. "Time to move," Jake said, checking his gear. "Every step counts. If we miss anything, the consequences could be catastrophic." Soon, a group of officers clad in bulletproof vests and equipped with necessary gear crossed into the abandoned industrial zone where the lab was located. As they approached the lab, Jake noticed the place looked deserted and gloomy. The wooden panels and the dilapidated structure of the building did not bode well. "On the line. We're ready," came a voice over the radio. "Your team can start the operation." Nina gave the signal, and the police team silently approached the building. Several detectives quickly entered the building through a side door, which was used as the main access point. Jake and Alex stood by the main entrance, waiting for the signal to begin. After a few seconds, the signal came, and the team quickly moved inside. The sounds of destruction and protests from within indicated that they were in the heart of the operation. As Jake and Alex advanced, they saw shattered shelves filled with chemical reagents and partially destroyed drug packages. It felt like scenes from a movie, but now it was reality. "Looks like those who were unlucky stayed here," Alex joked, trying to lighten the tension. The police team found several hidden rooms behind the main lab, filled with massive tanks of chemicals and drug packages. In one room, fully equipped for drug synthesis, they discovered significant amounts of powders, packages with labels, and usage instructions. Maps showing transportation routes and drug distribution plans were pinned to the walls, confirming the network's large-scale operations. However, the most important finds were related to records discovered in one of the desks. These were ledgers and contact lists containing names and phone numbers of key figures in the network, as well as addresses linked to financial transactions. These documents would undoubtedly serve as valuable evidence in court. "All the documents are here. We need to collect them and send them to the lab," Jake said, examining the records. During the raid, several individuals found at the lab were arrested. They turned out to be among the key figures managing the network. These arrests were a significant step in their investigation, and each one could provide valuable information about the higher echelons of the criminal organization. As the operation concluded, officers and detectives began sorting and packing all collected evidence. Jake and Alex, watching the process, knew that the next step awaited them, preparing for court proceedings and eliminating the remaining links in the drug network chain. "We did it," Alex said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Now we need to make sure all this is put to good use." Jake nodded. "Yes, but this is just the beginning. We must prepare for the extensive work ahead to completely dismantle this network." With these thoughts, Jake and Alex left the operation site, realizing that their efforts had already started to pay off, but a long road lay ahead for the full disclosure of the criminal scheme. The trial began in a Houston courtroom, and in a city still reeling from the shock of recent events, it immediately drew massive attention. Reporters and cameras were ready to capture every moment of the proceedings. The courtroom was packed, not only with journalists and lawyers but also with members of the public interested in the outcome of the case. On the defendant's bench sat the main accused, Rob Kane, known in the criminal world as the Captain, and several of his key associates. Kane, who had been implicated in numerous accounts of managing the drug network, was one of the most notorious and dangerous criminals in the city. His appearance, well-groomed, with a cold expression, indicated that he was not going to surrender easily. Jake Hunter, now a crucial witness in the trial, sat in the witness stand. He felt the mounting tension and pressure. He was tasked not only with presenting evidence but also with shedding light on the scale of the criminal scheme. The trial began with the prosecutor's statement, confidently presenting the case. He detailed the drugs found in the lab and how they were intended for mass distribution. Jake's testimony and other evidence provided by the police illustrated the scope of the operation and its devastating impact on society. When it was Jake's turn to testify, he stood up, holding his head high, and began recounting what had happened at Walmart. He described the moment he noticed a suspicious customer and tried to call security. He also shared how he later learned about the effects of the new drug and its connection to the lab. The audience listened intently, and each fact seemed more shocking than the last. Jake's testimony was corroborated by documents and evidence found in the lab. He explained how the drugs were used for testing on customers at retail locations and how this contributed to further distribution. A significant part of the trial involved the testimony of other witnesses. One such witness, an informant who provided information about the internal structure of the drug network, confirmed Robert Kane's role and his connections with criminal groups. The informant described how Kane used his connections to sustain and operate the criminal network. The defense, for its part, attempted to undermine the credibility of the witnesses and evidence, arguing that all the evidence was either insufficient or fabricated. The defense lawyers tried to portray Kane as a victim of circumstances and a scapegoat. However, the courtroom evidence and testimonies painted too clear a picture to be ignored. Public interest in the case was immense. The entire country followed the trial, and news of the proceedings frequently occupied the front pages of newspapers and news feeds. Documents and details from the courtroom became hot topics on television and social media. Many awaited to see how the law would handle one of the largest drug networks. After several weeks of intense court proceedings, the jury reached a verdict. All defendants, including Robert Kane, were found guilty on all counts. The verdict was a testament to the work of law enforcement and their efforts to dismantle the criminal network. Applause broke out in the courtroom. Jake felt that the job was done, and justice had prevailed. The trial became a landmark event, showcasing the power of justice and society's readiness to combat drug crime. After the conclusion of the trial and the arrest of key figures in the drug network, Houston began to slowly return to normal life. While justice had been served, the aftermath of the investigation and trial left a profound impact on the community. One of the first steps toward recovery was the enhancement of security measures. Walmart, where the entire story began, became a symbol of new standards. The company's management decided not only to improve internal security protocols but also to implement new technologies to prevent similar incidents in the future. Stephen Moore, the regional director of Walmart, spearheaded efforts to modernize the security system. New surveillance cameras with improved image quality and round-the-clock monitoring capabilities were installed in every store. Specialized training programs for employees on identifying suspicious behavior and responding to emergencies were also developed. Strict background checks for all new employees were introduced, and access control systems were strengthened. It was crucial not only to prevent such incidents but also to ensure the safety of both customers and staff. These measures became mandatory across the entire company to eliminate the possibility of similar events occurring. Other businesses in the area followed Walmart's example. Enhanced security and monitoring systems were implemented in stores, restaurants, and bars, and business owners began conducting regular security training for their staff on managing potential threats. Numerous public meetings and forums were held in the city to discuss restoration and security improvement measures. Jake Hunter, now a prominent figure in Houston, frequently spoke at such events. He shared his experiences and emphasized the importance of public vigilance and involvement in maintaining safety. At one of these meetings, organized at a local community center, Jake talked about how crucial teamwork was in addressing the drug network threat. He stressed that the combined efforts of law enforcement, businesses, and citizens had made the successful resolution of the case and the restoration of order possible. Alongside efforts to bolster security, a public awareness campaign about drugs and their effects was launched in the city. Organizations and volunteer groups developed educational programs and materials to warn about the dangers of drugs and highlight the importance of reporting suspicious activities. The restoration measures became part of a new chapter in the city's life. Despite the challenges and trauma left by criminal activities, Houston began to return to a state of calm. The new level of security and collective vigilance made the city safer than ever. Jake Hunter, recognized for his efforts, continued his career in crime prevention. He understood that the fight against drug crime was a long-term process requiring constant attention and work. But thanks to the community's collective efforts and the restoration initiatives, Houston took a significant step toward creating a safe and stable environment for its residents.